My name is Jennifer Mitchell, and I'm 41 years old. I live in Chicago, Illinois, in a beautiful townhouse in Lincoln Park that I used to think represented everything I had worked for. High ceilings, hardwood floors, a kitchen with marble countertops, and windows that overlook a tree-lined street. From the outside, my life looked like success, like I had made it, like I was living the dream that so many people aspire to. But here's what nobody tells you about dreams. Sometimes they're built on foundations that are slowly crumbling beneath your feet, and you don't realize it until the entire structure collapses. I met my husband, Thomas Mitchell, when I was 33 years old. I was working as a financial analyst at an investment firm downtown. Thomas was a real estate developer. He was confident, ambitious, and he had this way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the room. When he talked to you, we met at a networking event. He approached me at the bar, introduced himself, and we talked for 2 hours about markets, investments, and our respective careers. I was impressed by his knowledge. I was attracted to his drive, and when he asked me out to dinner the following week, I said yes without hesitation. The courtship was intense. Thomas was generous with his time and his resources. He took me to expensive restaurants. He surprised me with weekend trips. He made me feel valued in a way I hadn't felt in previous relationships. And within 8 months, he proposed. Looking back now, I can see the red flags that I missed. But at the time, I was swept up in the romance of it all. I was 34 years old, and I wanted to build a life with someone. I wanted partnership. I wanted security. And Thomas seemed to offer all of that. We got married in a beautiful ceremony at the Chicago Botanic Garden. It was a small wedding, about 100 guests. My parents were there, though they had some reservations about how quickly things were moving. My best friend, Amanda, was my maid of honor. She pulled me aside before the ceremony and asked if I was sure, if I really knew Thomas well enough to marry him. I know him, I said. I love him. This is right. She nodded, but I could see the concern in her eyes. The first year of marriage was fine. We both worked demanding jobs. We came home tired. We had dinner together most nights. We talked about our days. It felt normal. It felt like what I imagined marriage should feel like. But then something shifted in year 2. Thomas started making comments about my spending. Not in an aggressive way at first. Just observations, questions. Do you really need another pair of shoes? He'd ask when I came home with a shopping bag. That's an expensive dinner out with Amanda. How much did you spend? I noticed the credit card bill was higher this month. What did you buy? At first, I didn't think much of it. I thought he was just being financially responsible. We were both high earners, but we also had financial goals. We wanted to buy a bigger house eventually. We talked about maybe having children, so being mindful of spending seemed reasonable. But the comments became more frequent, and they started to have an edge to them. A criticism, a judgment. You're not very good with money, are you? He said one evening when I mentioned I had bought a new coat. I was taken aback. What do you mean? I make my own money. I pay my share of the bills. Yeah, but you spend frivolously. You don't think about the future. You just spend on whatever you want in the moment. This wasn't true. I had a retirement account. I had savings. I was financially responsible. But the way he said it made me question myself, made me wonder if maybe I was spending too much without realizing it. Over time, Thomas began to insert himself more deeply into my financial life. He suggested we consolidate our bank accounts. It'll be easier, he said. We can manage everything together. We're married. We should be sharing everything. I hesitated. I had always maintained financial independence. Even in my previous relationships, I had kept separate accounts. But Thomas framed it as a sign of commitment, as a way to show that we were truly partners. So I agreed. We moved all our money into joint accounts. And that's when things really started to change. Thomas began monitoring every transaction I made. If I bought coffee, he'd ask about it. If I went to lunch with a colleague, he wanted to know how much it cost and why I couldn't have just brought lunch from home. We need to be more careful, he'd say. We have goals. We can't just waste money. But here's the thing. He wasn't cutting back on his own spending. He was buying expensive electronics. He was going out to bars with his colleagues and spending hundreds of dollars. He was taking clients to fancy dinners on the company card, but then also spending personal money on himself. The double standard was obvious to me, but when I pointed it out, he had explanations. That's business networking. That's an investment in my career. Your spending is just ... frivolous. The arguments about money became constant, at least once a week, sometimes more. And they weren't just disagreements. They were fights where Thomas would become cold and cutting, where he would say things that were designed to make me feel stupid, irresponsible, childish. "You're like a teenager with a credit card," he said once. "You have no concept of financial responsibility." I started to feel like I couldn't buy anything without justifying it. I started to feel anxious every time I spent money, even on necessities. I started to hide purchases. I would buy something and then feel guilty about it, so I'd hide the receipt. I'd take off price tags immediately, so he wouldn't see how much something cost. This was absurd. I was a grown woman with a career and my own income, but I had been made to feel like a child who couldn't be trusted with money. In year 3 of our marriage, Thomas made a decision that would change everything. He wanted to buy an investment property, a condo in an up-and-coming neighborhood that he believed would appreciate significantly. "It's a great opportunity," he said. "We should use our savings as a down payment." "Our savings?" I asked. "That's my money too. I worked hard to save that." "It's our money now, Jennifer. We're married, and this is an investment in our future." I was uncomfortable with the idea. I wanted to keep some liquid savings in case of emergency, but Thomas was insistent. He showed me spreadsheets. He showed me market analysis. He made it seem like this was the smart financial decision, and that I was being irrational for hesitating. Eventually, I agreed. We used $60,000 of our combined savings, most of which was mine to put down on this investment property. Thomas handled all the paperwork. He handled all the details, and when everything was finalized, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. The property was in his name only, not our names. His. "Why isn't my name on the deed?" I asked. "It's easier this way for tax purposes," he said. "Don't worry, it's still our investment." But it wasn't. Legally, I had no claim to this property, even though I had contributed the majority of the down payment. I consulted with a lawyer friend privately. She told me that what Thomas had done was a form of financial abuse, that he had essentially taken my money and put it into an asset I couldn't access. "You need to protect yourself," she said. "This is a red flag." But I didn't know how to protect myself. I was married to him. Our finances were completely entangled, and I still loved him. I still believed that maybe this was just a misunderstanding, that maybe he really did think it was the right financial structure. Looking back, I can see how naive I was, how much I wanted to believe that his actions had innocent explanations. But the truth was that Thomas was systematically gaining control over my financial life, and I was letting him do it. By year 4, the situation had escalated. Thomas now controlled all our accounts. He gave me a monthly allowance of $1,500 for personal expenses. $1,500 might sound like a lot, but it had to cover everything: groceries, gas, personal items, any social activities, clothing, everything. Meanwhile, Thomas had unlimited access to all the money. He could spend whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted. When I complained about this arrangement, he told me I was being ungrateful. "I'm the primary earner," he said, which wasn't even true. I was making nearly as much as he was. "I'm managing our finances responsibly. If you can't handle having a budget, that says more about you than it does about me." The gaslighting was constant. He would rewrite history. He would tell me I had agreed to things I knew I hadn't agreed to. He would claim I was misremembering conversations or being dramatic. I started to doubt my own reality. I started to feel like maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was bad with money. Maybe I was irresponsible. Maybe I should be grateful that Thomas was managing everything. But underneath all that doubt, there was a small voice that kept saying, "This isn't right. This isn't how partnership works. This isn't love." That voice got louder in the summer of 2019, when I discovered that Thomas had taken out a line of credit against the investment property. The property that was in his name only, that I had helped pay for, and had used that money to invest in a risky business venture without telling me. When I confronted him, his response was chilling. "I don't need your permission to make financial decisions," he said. "You clearly don't understand money. I'm the one who knows what I'm doing. You should trust me." But I didn't trust him anymore. And that's when I knew I had to start planning my escape. After discovering that Thomas had taken out a line of credit without my knowledge, I started to see our entire financial situation with new clarity, and what I saw was a systematic pattern of control that had been building for years. I began to document everything. I created a secret email account that Thomas didn't know about. I started forwarding myself copies of bank statements, credit card bills, loan documents, anything that showed the full picture of our finances. What I discovered was worse than I had imagined. Thomas had been hiding significant debt. He had credit cards that I didn't know about, maxed out to their limits. He had taken out personal loans. He had made risky investments that had lost money, and all of this had been funded by our joint accounts and my contributions. Meanwhile, he had been restricting my access to money, criticizing every dollar I spent, making me account for every purchase. The hypocrisy was staggering, but more than that, it was calculated. He was deliberately creating a situation where I was financially dependent on him, where I couldn't leave even if I wanted to, because I didn't have access to resources. I started seeing a therapist. I told Thomas I was going to yoga classes. Instead, I was going to see Dr. Sarah Williams, a therapist who specialized in domestic abuse. What you're describing is economic abuse, Dr. Williams told me in our third session. It's a form of domestic violence that doesn't leave physical marks, but it's just as damaging. Your husband is using money as a tool to control you, to limit your options, to keep you trapped. Hearing someone name what was happening was both validating and terrifying. Validating because it confirmed that I wasn't crazy, that my instincts were right. Terrifying because it meant I was in an abusive relationship and I didn't know how to get out. Dr. Williams helped me understand the dynamics of what was happening, how financial abuse often starts with seemingly reasonable requests or suggestions, how it escalates gradually so that you don't notice how much control you've lost until it's almost too late, how it's designed to make you doubt yourself, to make you feel incompetent and dependent. She also helped me start planning a path forward. You need to establish financial independence, she said. You need to have resources that he can't access. You need to protect yourself legally, and you need to do all of this carefully, because when abusers realize they're losing control, they often escalate. I started by opening a bank account at a different bank, one Thomas had never used. I used my work address for the statements so nothing would come to our house. I started depositing small amounts of money from my paycheck directly into this account before it ever hit our joint account. It wasn't much at first. $100 here, $200 there. But over several months, it added up. I was building an escape fund. I also started documenting the financial abuse more systematically. I kept a journal where I recorded every argument about money. Every time Thomas criticized my spending, every time he made a financial decision without consulting me, every time he restricted my access to money. March 15th, T angry that I bought groceries from Whole Foods instead of regular grocery store. Said I was wasting money. Spent 30 minutes lecturing me about fiscal responsibility. Later that same day, came home with a new watch worth $800. When I pointed out the hypocrisy, he said it was an investment piece. April 3rd, discovered I had transferred $5,000 from our savings to his personal investment account without telling me. When I asked about it, he said I was being controlling and that he didn't need to justify his financial decisions to me. May 12th, T reduced my monthly allowance to $1,000. Said we needed to tighten the budget, but he went out to an expensive dinner with clients the next day and spent over $300. Seeing these incidents written down, accumulating over time, made the pattern undeniable. This wasn't just disagreements about money. This was systematic control. I also reached out to Amanda, my best friend, who I had been distancing from because Thomas always made negative comments when I spent time with her. He doesn't want you to have friends, Amanda said bluntly when I finally told her what was happening. He's isolating you so that you're completely dependent on him. Jennifer, this is abuse. You need to get out. But getting out was complicated. I had no access to most of our money. I didn't know the full extent of our assets because Thomas handled everything. I didn't even know if we had debt I wasn't aware of. Amanda connected me with a divorce attorney named Lisa Richardson who specialized in cases involving financial abuse. Lisa was direct and practical about what I needed to do. First, we need to get a complete picture of your marital finances, Lisa said. You have a legal right to access account statements, loan documents, tax returns, everything. We need to gather all of that information. How do I do that without him knowing? I asked. Carefully, Lisa said. When he's at work, you go through his files. You photograph documents. You copy statements. You gather everything you can find. And you also need to run a credit report on yourself to see what accounts or loans he might have opened in your name. The idea of going through Thomas's private files felt wrong, like a violation of trust. But then I remembered that he had been violating my trust for years. That he had used my money without my permission, that he had restricted my access to our shared resources while giving himself complete freedom, so I did it. One afternoon when Thomas was at work, I went through his home office. I photographed bank statements, loan documents, credit card bills, investment account statements, the deed to the investment property. Everything I could find. What I discovered was even worse than I had feared. Thomas had accumulated over $80,000 in debt, credit cards, personal loans, lines of credit. He had been making minimum payments on most of these, which meant the interest was compounding rapidly. He had also been taking money out of my retirement account. I didn't even know this was possible, but apparently, he had forged my signature on some paperwork that gave him access. He had withdrawn $15,000 over the past year. I was furious. I was devastated. I was terrified. I took all the documentation to Lisa. She reviewed everything carefully and then gave me her assessment. "This is serious financial abuse," she said. "He's been systematically draining your resources while hiding his own financial mismanagement. You have grounds for divorce based on financial misconduct, and we can likely get a favorable settlement because of what he's done." "How favorable?" I asked. "You contributed significantly to the marital assets. You can prove that he misused your contributions. You can prove that he restricted your access to money while giving himself unlimited access. A judge will likely see this as inequitable conduct and award you a larger share of the assets." But there was a complication: the investment property that Thomas had put only in his name. "That's going to be tricky," Lisa said. "Legally, it's his separate property, but if you can prove that you contributed to the down payment and that there was an understanding it would be joint property, we might be able to argue that you have an equitable interest in it." Over the next several months, I continued to gather evidence and prepare for what was coming. I had to be strategic. I had to be patient. I couldn't let Thomas know what I was planning because I was afraid of how he would react. The arguments about money continued and escalated. Thomas became more controlling. He started checking my receipts. He started questioning where I was going and what I was doing. Not out of concern, but to make sure I wasn't spending money without his knowledge. One night, I came home with a new pair of work shoes. They were on sale, $30. Necessary because my old shoes had holes. Thomas saw the box and his face darkened. "What's that?" he asked. "Shoes. For work. My old ones were falling apart." "How much did you spend?" $30. $30 that we don't have right now. Jennifer, do you not understand that we're trying to save money? Do you not get that every dollar matters? You just bought a new laptop last week for $2,000, I said. "That's for work. That's a business expense. Your shoes are personal. My shoes are for work too. It's not the same thing, and you know it. You just always have an excuse for why you should be able to spend money while I'm over here trying to keep us financially stable." The gaslighting was so blatant that I almost laughed, but I didn't. I just walked away. That night, I wrote in my journal, "I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I need to get out." 2 weeks later, I met with Lisa again. I had now accumulated about $8,000 in my secret account. I had copies of all the financial documents. I had documentation of the abuse. I was ready. "I want to file for divorce," I said. "Are you sure?" Lisa asked. "Once we file, there's no going back. He's going to know what you're doing." "I'm sure," I said. "I can't stay married to someone who treats me like this. I deserve better." Lisa nodded. "Okay, let's do this." The process of preparing for divorce while still living with Thomas was one of the most stressful periods of my entire life. I was essentially living a double life, playing the role of dutiful wife while secretly building a case against him and planning my exit. Dr. Williams helped me develop a safety plan. She explained that financial abusers often escalate when they sense they're losing control, and I needed to be prepared for that possibility. "Do you have a place you can go if you need to leave quickly?" she asked. "I can stay with Amanda," I said. "Good. Keep a bag packed with essentials. Keep important documents in a place where you can grab them quickly. Have your phone charged. Have some cash on hand that he doesn't know about." It felt paranoid, but I did it anyway. I packed a small bag with clothes, toiletries, copies of documents, and some cash, and I kept it hidden in the trunk of my car. I also started working with Lisa to understand exactly what I was entitled to in the divorce. In Illinois, marital property is divided equitably, which doesn't necessarily mean equally, but it does mean fairly based on various factors. "You contributed significantly to the marital assets," Lisa explained. "You have documentation showing that Thomas misused your contributions, hid debt, and restricted your access to money. All of that works in your favor." We also discussed the investment property. Lisa consulted with another attorney who specialized in real estate law, and they developed a strategy. We're going to argue that even though the property is in his name, you have an equitable interest in it based on your financial contribution to the down payment, Lisa said. We'll need to prove that there was an understanding between you that this would be joint property, even if that understanding wasn't formalized legally. I dug through old emails and text messages where Thomas and I had discussed the property. I found conversations where he referred to it as our investment and our property. These would be important evidence. I also started rebuilding my professional network. During the marriage, I had let many professional relationships lapse because Thomas was always critical when I spent time networking or attending industry events. He would make comments about how I was wasting time or chasing status, instead of focusing on our family and our finances. But now, I understood that he had been isolating me professionally as well as personally. He wanted me to be dependent on him, and that meant keeping me from building relationships that could support me. I reached out to former colleagues. I updated my LinkedIn profile. I started attending industry events again. When Thomas questioned where I was going, I told him I was working on professional development, which he couldn't really argue against, given that he was always telling me I needed to earn more money. Through these I learned about job opportunities that I hadn't known existed. I updated my resume. I started discreetly interviewing for positions that would give me more financial independence. By the fall of 2019, I had built a solid foundation for my post-divorce life. I had financial resources. I had professional prospects. I had legal representation. I had a support system. I had evidence of the financial abuse. But I still hadn't told Thomas I wanted a divorce. I was waiting for the right moment. Or maybe I was just scared of what would happen when I finally said the words. The decision was made for me. In November 2019, when I discovered that Thomas had opened a credit card in my name without my knowledge and had maxed it out, I only found out because I received a call from a collections agency. Apparently, Thomas hadn't been making the payments, and the account was now seriously delinquent. When I confronted him, his response was to blame me. "You clearly aren't managing your credit responsibly," he said. "I opened that card to help us consolidate debt, but you obviously don't understand how these things work. I didn't know about this card. You opened it without telling me. That's fraud." "It's not fraud when we're married. What's mine is yours and what's yours is mine. That's how marriage works." "No, Thomas, that's not how marriage works. That's how financial abuse works." His face changed. He realized that I had named what was happening. That I understood. "Financial abuse," he repeated slowly. "You think I'm abusing you?" "Yes, I do. You're being dramatic. I've been managing our finances because you're not capable of doing it. I've been trying to build our future. And this is how you thank me. By accusing me of abuse. You've been controlling me. You've been restricting my access to our money while spending freely yourself. You've hidden debt. You've made financial decisions without consulting me. You've opened accounts in my name without my knowledge. All of that is financial abuse." Thomas laughed. Actually laughed. "You've been reading too much feminist propaganda online. You've been listening to your friends who are jealous of what we have. You need to get some perspective." But I had perspective now, and I knew what I needed to do. "I want a divorce," I said. The words hung in the air between us. Thomas stared at me like I had slapped him. "You want a what?" "A divorce. I'm done. I can't be in this marriage anymore." His expression shifted through several emotions: shock, disbelief, anger, calculation. "You can't divorce me," he said finally. "You have nothing. I control all our money. You'll have nowhere to go. You'll have nothing." "Actually, I do have somewhere to go, and I do have money, and I have a lawyer who's going to make sure I get what I'm entitled to." I could see him processing this, realizing that I had been planning, that I had been preparing, that he had underestimated me. "If you try to divorce me, I'll fight you on everything," he said. His voice was cold now. "I'll make sure you get nothing. I'll drag this out for years. I'll make your life hell." "You've already been making my life hell," I said. "A divorce can't be worse than staying married to you." I called Amanda from our bedroom. I told her I needed to stay with her. She said she'd be there in 20 minutes. I grabbed my pre-packed bag from the trunk of my car. I grabbed my laptop. I grabbed my important documents. And I walked out of that townhouse. Thomas stood in the doorway, watching me leave. "You're making a huge mistake," he called out. "You'll regret this." But as I got into Amanda's car and drove away, I didn't feel regret. I felt relief. Lisa filed the divorce petition the next day. In Illinois, you can file for divorce on the grounds of irreconcilable differences, which is what we did. We also filed a motion for temporary financial support and for an accounting of all marital assets. Thomas's response was swift and aggressive. He hired an expensive divorce attorney, someone with a reputation for being ruthless. His attorney immediately filed countermotions arguing that I had abandoned the marriage, that I was exaggerating financial disagreements, that I was trying to take more than my fair share. The legal battle was brutal. Thomas's strategy was to paint me as a frivolous spender who didn't understand finances and who was now trying to unfairly profit from the divorce. His attorney subpoenaed my credit card statements and bank records, looking for examples of what they could characterize as wasteful spending. But Lisa was prepared for this. She had all the documentation I had gathered showing the full picture of our finances, the hidden debt, the unauthorized use of my retirement funds, the credit card opened in my name, the investment property put only in his name, the systematic restriction of my access to money. The financial forensics phase was fascinating in a disturbing way. Lisa brought in a forensic accountant who traced every dollar that had gone through our accounts during the marriage. What they uncovered was a clear pattern of Thomas enriching himself while impoverishing me. Over the course of the marriage, I had contributed approximately $250,000 to our joint accounts and investments. Thomas had contributed approximately $230,000, but the way the money had been spent was grossly inequitable. Thomas had spent approximately $180,000 on himself personal purchases, investments in his name only, debt payments on his separate credit cards. Meanwhile, he had restricted me to spending about $40,000 over the same time period, and most of that was on shared expenses like groceries and household items. The forensic accountant presented this in a detailed report with charts and graphs that made the inequity visually undeniable. When we went to court for the preliminary hearings, the judge reviewed the evidence and made some initial rulings that were favorable to me. She ordered Thomas to provide me with immediate access to half of our liquid assets. She ordered him to pay my attorney fees. She ordered him to stop making any major financial decisions without court approval. Thomas was furious. His attorney argued that these orders were punitive and unfair, but the judge was unmoved. Mr. Mitchell has demonstrated a pattern of financial control that disadvantaged his wife. The judge said, "These orders are designed to level the playing field while we work toward a final settlement." The discovery phase was even more revealing. Lisa subpoenaed documents from Thomas's business, his investment accounts, his bank records, everything. And what we found was shocking. Thomas had been hiding significant assets. He had offshore accounts that he hadn't disclosed. He had investments in his family members' names that were really his. He had been systematically moving money out of our marital accounts and into these hidden accounts. The forensic accountant estimated that Thomas had hidden approximately $150,000 in assets. "This is financial fraud," Lisa said, "and it's going to work very much in your favor." We also pursued the issue of the investment property. Through subpoenaed documents, we were able to prove that I had contributed $40,000 of the $60,000 down payment. We had email exchanges where Thomas referred to it as our investment and promised that it would benefit both of us. The property had appreciated in value and was now worth about $400,000 with $300,000 in equity after the mortgage was paid down. "You have a strong case for claiming an equitable interest in that property," Lisa said. "At minimum, you should get back your initial contribution plus appreciation, but we're going to argue for half the equity because it was understood to be joint property." Thomas fought everything, every asset division, every support calculation, every claim I made. His strategy seemed to be to make the divorce so expensive and time-consuming that I would give up and accept less than I deserved. But I didn't give up, because this wasn't just about money. This was about justice. This was about refusing to be controlled anymore. This was about making sure he didn't get away with what he had done. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Both sides presented evidence. Expert witnesses testified. Thomas took the stand and painted himself as a victim of a vindictive wife who was trying to ruin him financially. "I worked hard to build our life together," he testified. "I made financial decisions that I thought were in our best interest. If Jennifer felt excluded from those decisions, that's unfortunate, but it wasn't intentional. I was trying to protect her from the stress of financial management." It was a masterful performance of gaslighting. He made himself sound reasonable and caring. He made me sound irrational and greedy. But then Lisa cross-examined him. She walked him through every hidden account, every unauthorized transaction, every lie he had told, every time he had restricted my access to money while giving himself unlimited freedom. "Mr. Mitchell, you testified that you were trying to protect your wife from financial stress," Lisa said. "But isn't it true that you opened a credit card in her name without her knowledge?" "I don't recall doing that." "You don't recall. Lisa held up documents. This is an application for a credit card in Mrs. Mitchell's name, with your signature. Are you saying this isn't your signature? Thomas hesitated. I may have signed it, but I would have told her about it. Mrs. Mitchell only found out about this card when a collections agency called her because you hadn't been making payments. Does that sound like you told her about it? I don't remember every conversation we had. You also testified that you were trying to make financial decisions in the best interest of the marriage, but you hid approximately $150,000 in assets that you didn't disclose in your initial financial disclosures. How was hiding that money in your wife's best interest? Thomas didn't have a good answer to that. When it was my turn to testify, I was nervous, but prepared. I talked about the systematic control, the restricted access to money, the constant criticism, the hidden debt, the unauthorized use of my retirement funds, the way he had made me feel incompetent and dependent. Did you love your husband? Thomas's attorney asked on cross-examination. I did, I said, but love shouldn't mean accepting abuse, and what he did to me was abuse. You keep using that word, abuse. But wasn't this just normal marital disagreements about finances? No. Normal disagreements involve both people having equal say. Normal disagreements involve transparency. What Thomas did was systematically take control of our finances while making me feel like I couldn't be trusted with money. That's not a disagreement. That's control. After all the evidence was presented, the judge took a week to make her decision. When we returned to court for the ruling, I was terrified. What if she didn't see it the way I saw it? What if she thought I was exaggerating? What if Thomas won? But the judge's ruling was clear and decisive. She found that Thomas had engaged in financial misconduct throughout the marriage. She found that he had hidden assets and made fraudulent transfers. She found that he had systematically disadvantaged me financially. The asset division was 60-40 in my favor. I got $600,000 from the total marital assets, which included my share of the townhouse, my share of retirement accounts, my equitable interest in the investment property, and a portion of the liquid assets. I also got 5 years of spousal support at $3,000 per month. Thomas was ordered to pay my attorney fees, which totaled $75,000, and most importantly, the judge included language in the ruling that specifically stated Thomas had engaged in economic abuse during the marriage. That finding was now part of the public record. When the judge read the ruling, I cried. Not tears of joy exactly, but tears of relief. Tears of validation, tears that came from finally being believed, finally being seen, finally having someone in authority say, yes, what happened to you was wrong, and you deserve justice. Thomas's face was stone. He didn't look at me. He just gathered his things and left the courtroom with his attorney. It was over. The months after the divorce were finalized were strange. I had won. I had gotten a favorable settlement. I had escaped an abusive marriage, but I also felt lost. For years, my life had been defined by trying to manage Thomas's control. Trying to protect myself, trying to survive. Now that I didn't have to do that anymore, I wasn't sure who I was or what I wanted. I moved into a small apartment in Wicker Park. It wasn't as nice as the townhouse, but it was mine. I furnished it slowly, deliberately, choosing things I actually liked rather than things Thomas would approve of. The financial settlement gave me a cushion. $600,000 was significant, but I also knew I needed to be smart about it. I didn't want to end up in a position where I was financially vulnerable again. I worked with a financial planner to develop a strategy. We put a portion of the money into low-risk investments. We rebuilt my retirement account. We set aside an emergency fund, and I used a portion to put a down payment on a small condo that would be mine, in my name only, free and clear of any connection to Thomas, the financial planner. A woman named Rachel Chen was instrumental in helping me rebuild my relationship with money. You've been through financial trauma, she explained. Just like other forms of trauma, it affects how you think and feel about the thing that was used to hurt you. You're going to have anxiety about money. You're going to second-guess your financial decisions. You're going to have triggers. That's all normal. She was right. I found myself feeling anxious whenever I had to make a purchase. I would stand in stores holding items, calculating in my head whether I could afford them, whether I deserved them, whether Thomas would have criticized me for buying them. It took months of conscious effort to remind myself that Thomas's voice was no longer relevant, that I could buy what I wanted with my own money, that I didn't need to justify or explain my purchases to anyone. I also continued therapy with Dr. Williams. We worked through the emotional aftermath of the divorce. We processed the years of financial abuse. We talked about how to rebuild my sense of self. The hardest part of recovering from financial abuse, Dr. Williams told me, is learning to trust your own judgment again. You spent years being told that your financial decisions were wrong, that you were irresponsible, that you couldn't be trusted with money. Even though intellectually you know that wasn't true, emotionally you still carry those messages. She was right. I struggled with I would make a financial decision and then immediately question whether it was the right one. I would hear Thomas's voice in my head criticizing me. But slowly, over time, those voices got quieter. I made good financial decisions, and nothing bad happened. I bought things I wanted, and the world didn't end. I managed my own money successfully, and I realized I had always been capable of doing this. Thomas had just convinced me I wasn't. I also rebuilt my career. The job interviews I had started during the divorce preparation phase led to an offer at a new investment firm. It was a senior analyst position with a significant salary increase. I accepted. Working at the new firm was liberating. Nobody there knew about my divorce. Nobody knew about the financial abuse. I could just be Jennifer Mitchell, talented financial analyst. Without any of the baggage from my marriage, my colleagues respected my expertise. My boss valued my contributions. I was promoted within a year to a management position. For the first time in years, I felt professionally fulfilled. I also reconnected with friends I had lost during the marriage. Amanda, of course, had been with me throughout the divorce, but there were others I had distanced from because Thomas had made it difficult to maintain friendships. I reached out to them. One by one, I explained what had happened. Some were understanding and welcomed me back into their lives. Others were hurt by the years of distance and weren't ready to reconnect. I had to accept that some relationships might not be salvageable, and that was a consequence of the isolation Thomas had imposed. But I also made new friends. I joined a women's networking group. I took an art class. I started going to book club meetings at a local bookstore. I built a social life that was mine, that had nothing to do with Thomas. One of the most healing things I did was to volunteer with an organization that helped women experiencing financial abuse. I started by just doing administrative work. But eventually I began facilitating support groups for women who were going through what I had been through. Hearing other women's stories was both heartbreaking and affirming. Heartbreaking because financial abuse is so common and so devastating. Affirming because I could help them see what I hadn't been able to see for so long. That what was happening to them wasn't normal, wasn't their fault, and wasn't something they had to accept. You helped save my life, one woman told me after a support group meeting. She was in the early stages of planning her escape from a financially abusive marriage. Hearing you talk about what you went through, and how you got out, and how you're okay now, it made me believe I could do it too. That's when I understood that my experience, as painful as it had been, could have meaning, could have purpose. I could take what happened to me and use it to help others. By 2021, 2 years after the divorce, I was in a completely different place. I was financially stable. I was professionally successful. I had a support system. I had rebuilt my sense of self. I also started dating again, which was terrifying. I was so afraid of ending up in another controlling relationship. I was hyper-vigilant about red flags. Anytime a man asked me about money, I would tense up, wondering if this was the beginning of another pattern. But I also had much better boundaries now. I knew what I was looking for in a partner and what I would absolutely not tolerate. I knew that financial transparency and equality were non-negotiable. I knew that I deserved respect. I dated a few people casually. None of them turned into serious relationships, but that was okay. I was learning that being single was actually pretty great. I had freedom. I had autonomy. I had the ability to make my own decisions without having to justify them to anyone. In early 2022, I met someone named David. We met at a fundraising event for the organization I volunteered with. He was there because his sister had gone through financial abuse in her marriage, and he wanted to support the cause. David was different from Thomas in every way that mattered. He was transparent about his finances. He respected my financial independence. He never questioned my spending or tried to control my money. When we eventually moved in together, we kept our finances completely separate. We split shared expenses 50-50, and everything else was our own business. I don't understand men who try to control their partner's money. David said to me once, "If you can't trust someone to manage their own finances, why are you with them?" It was such a simple observation, but it meant everything to me, because it showed that he understood something fundamental. Partnership is built on trust and respect, not control. Now, in 2024, I'm 43 years old. I've been divorced from Thomas for 4 years. I own my own condo. I have a thriving career. I have healthy relationships. I have financial security. More importantly, I have peace. I don't wake up anxious about money anymore. I don't feel like I have to hide purchases or justify decisions. I don't have someone constantly criticizing me and making me feel incompetent. Thomas, as far as I know, is still living in Chicago. I've heard through mutual acquaintances that he's in another relationship now. I feel sorry for her, whoever she is. I hope she sees the red flags before it's too late. I hope she has the resources and the support to get out if she needs to. I've thought about reaching out to her, about warning her, but my therapist advised against it. She probably wouldn't believe you. Dr. Williams said, abusers are very good at painting their exes as crazy or vindictive. The most you can do is be available if she ever reaches out to you. So, I've let it go. I've focused on my own healing, my own life, my own future. To anyone who's listening to this and recognizing themselves in my story, I want to say something directly to you. If your partner controls your access to money, that's financial abuse. If your partner criticizes every purchase you make while spending freely themselves, that's financial abuse. If your partner makes major financial decisions without consulting you, that's financial abuse. If your partner hides debt or assets from you, that's financial abuse. If your partner makes you account for every dollar while they have unlimited access to money, that's financial abuse. If your partner uses money as a tool to control you, to limit your options, to make you feel dependent and trapped, that's financial abuse. It doesn't matter if they're not physically violent. It doesn't matter if they provide a nice house or a comfortable lifestyle. It doesn't matter if they frame it as taking care of finances or being responsible. If the pattern is control, if the result is that you feel trapped and powerless, it's abuse, and you deserve better. I know it's scary to think about leaving. I know you might not have money saved. I know you might not know how you'd support yourself. I know you might feel like you can't survive without them. But here's what I learned. You're stronger than you think. You're more capable than they've made you believe, and there are resources available to help you. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24 hours a day at 1-800-7-90-9-SEV.